afternoon, and welcome to Craig Shaw Gardner's Guest of Honor speech. My name is Ginger Buchanan, and I'm Craig's editor at Ace Books. Craig and the convention had asked me to introduce Mr. Gardner to all of you. Unfortunately, a small problem has arisen. And what is this problem? I'm afraid that I have to inform you that Mr. Gardner has been temporarily called away on a matter of some urgency. However, he has assured me that he will return at the earliest possible moments. He has also, much more fortunately, provided me with a few notes so that I can fill you in on the background of Mr. Gardner's talk. Our guest's subject this afternoon will be expectation and surprise in comedy. This may, at first, appear to be a very serious topic. Indeed, it is true that Mr. Gardner is a much more serious individual than many people imagine, something I am sure he would tell you himself had he not been called away on a matter of some urgency. He will, I assure you again, return at the earliest possible moment. But what does Mr. Gardner mean by expectation? The Random House Dictionary defines expectation as the act or state of expecting, or an expectant mental attitude, or, in the plural, expectation. It can mean a prospect of future good or profit. The word after expectation in the dictionary is expectorant, which just goes to show you what you can find in dictionary. Testing. Testing. Is this thing on? As you recall, I was discussing expectation as we are all expecting Mr. Gardner, since he has been called away on a matter of some urgency, but he will return at the earliest possible opportunity. But to return to Mr. Gardner's notes, most jokes thrive on confronting or confirming our deeply held beliefs. Take the popular... Take the popular... Testing. Take the popular cycle of light bulb jokes, for instance. You know the ones. They go, how many blanks does it take to change a light bulb? And you fill in the blank with whatever group you choose. Feminists, union workers, politicians. An example that comes to mind is how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is, of course, just one, but the light bulb sincerely has to want to change. The joke is funny, because we can see the connection between psychiatrists and wanting to change. It surprises us pleasantly by fulfilling our expectations. But there are also different levels of expectation. The strangest light bulb joke of all goes, how many surrealists does it take to change a light bulb? The answer is a fish, and that makes perfect sense because surrealists attempt to go beyond expectations. And that brings me to the next point, for there is one thing Mr. Gardner, who was temporarily called away on a matter of some urgency, but has assured us he will return at the earliest possible moment. One thing that Mr. Gardner wants to ask of all of us: what happens in comedy when things get strange? As I was saying, what happens in comedy when things
Hello,
get strange?
I'm Mr. Ed. A horse is a horse, of course, and no one can talk to a horse, of course. That is, of course, unless the horse is the famous Mr. Ed. Go right to the source and ask the horse. He'll give you the answer that you endorse. He's always on a steady course. Talk to Mr. Ed. People yakety yak the street and waste your time a day. But Mr. Ed will never speak unless he has something to say. A horse is a horse, of course, and this one will talk till his voice is hoarse. You never heard of a talking horse? Well, listen to this. I am Mr. Ed.
What happens in comedy when things get strange? Cosby, Michael, 1211 South Street, Boston. Cosby, P, 28 Hazlitt Road. Cosby, Rita, 26 Grew Hill Road. Cosby, Roland, 1202 Commonwealth Avenue. Cosby, Wyatt, 37 Eastern Boulevard. Koskika, Antoinette, 262 Paris East, Boston.
Obviously,
Cossico, Domenico, 97 Dover.
About not intimidating girls.
Samara.
You want to meet girls around.
Kossica, Frank,
You have to do something
264 Paris East, Boston.
and intimidating.
Kossica in
I don't
shorts,
understand what more we have to
1108
do.
Cambridge Street, Cambridge. Kossica,
Why don't you
Loose,
listen?
670 Met Avenue, Hartford. Kossica Y, Saratoga East, Boston. Kazi James, 333 Massachusetts Avenue, Boston. However, there are a few more points that I feel must be made. What indeed happens in comedy when things get strange? Can we laugh if we don't know what to expect? And even if we do laugh, is it an easy, heartfelt laughter, or does it have a nervous, uncertain edge? These questions are at the center of what Mr. Gardner, who was unavoidably called away on a matter of some urgency, but has assured us that he will return at the earliest possible moment, confronts every day in his work. Yes, these are the deeper thoughts that occupy the mind of the working humorist. For when the unexpected turns into the expected, as happens in the light bulb jokes, we call it humor. But what happens when the expected turns into the unexpected? Things twist, they become frightening, and instead of humor, we find horror. Many of you may know that Mr. Gardner, who has been called away on a matter of some urgency, but has assured us he will return at the earliest possible moment, and is, in addition, a far more serious person than many people realize. Always, Mr. Gardner, besides writing in a number of humorous novels such as A Malady of Magics and Revenge of the Fluffy Bunnies, has also published over 24 horror stories and is currently the president of the Horror Writers of America. Humor and horror are opposite sides of the same coin. What does happen when things get strange? I realize that, for the moment, this is a purely academic question, but I trust that when Mr. Gardner does finally arrive, when he returns at the earliest possible moment from the matter of some urgency, he will bring concrete examples with him so that we can see how humor can be drawn from the commonplace and how the commonplace can turn around to scare us. Testing? Testing? I hope and trust and pray that Crenshaw Gardner will be coming soon. He was unavoidably called away on a matter of some urgency, but will return at the earliest possible moment. Or have I said that already?
And that's my point exactly. Oh. All right.
He couldn't just stand up here, could he?
Thank you, Ginger. A big hand to Ginger Buchanan, please. I've got a speech of my own here, second half of it. Gonna have to find it first. Okay, first off, I'd like to thank Arisia for the opportunity to dress up as a gorilla and make a spectacle of myself in front of hundreds of people. One of my lifelong dreams is at last fulfilled. Okay, enough frivolity. It's time to get a little more serious, for as Ginger remarked, I am indeed a far more serious individual than many people realize. Even before I was called away on a matter of some urgency, but I have assured you that I will return at the earliest possible moment, which should be any minute now. In the meantime, though, we've got 3 questions here. Why science fiction? Why humor? And what the hell just happened in this room? Okay, a little history here. I discovered science fiction when I was 10. 7 science fiction novels of H.G. Wells. Maybe you remember it. A big, thick hardcover in libraries everywhere, and full of stuff like men turning invisible, animals turned into men, and Martians zapping places that seemed a lot like my hometown. How could I resist? How could any of us resist? But science fiction back then was different. It covered anything and everything out of the ordinary. The Foundation trilogy, science fiction. Gladiator at Law, science fiction. The Lord of the Rings, hey, science fiction. Conan the Barbarian, science fiction. I Am Legend, The Incredible Shrinking Man, Some of Your Blood, science fiction. UFO conspiracy books? Well, not science fiction maybe, but always stuck with the science fiction. Yes, it was a simpler world back there in the distant past. Not a better world. I don't think the past is ever better than the present, except in some people's very foggy memories. And Lord knows the general level of writing today is far superior. But in those distant days, when you had to grab the science fiction books the first time you saw them on the drugstore rack, because it was likely you'd never, ever see them again. In those days, the words science fiction covered everything weird and everything wonderful and everything that challenged the imagination. Space opera, fantasy, science fiction satire, a genre which has virtually disappeared and one I would love to see come back. Hard science, horror, near future after the bomb books, although some of those just became bestsellers. A lot of this science fiction back in those days were reprint anthologies, just like some are now, although in those days, Martin H. Greenberg was named Groff Conklin. You may remember for a while in the 70s he was named Roger Elwood. It was in these anthologies that I discovered the 2 magazines that were to change my life, Weird Tales and Unknown Worlds. Weird Tales, of course, had all the icky stuff. Unspeakable creatures, no doubt composed of the worst items known to man. Pestilent fungi, the glue on the back of stamps, cold lima beans. And while Unknown Worlds could have its dark side too, it was by and large a lighter magazine, for many of its best fantasies were funny. Wow, funny fantasy. What a concept. Unspeakable horror and hilarious fantasy. I love them both, because, you see, they really are opposite sides of the same thing. For both, it takes something we know, or something we easily imagine, and twist it. If it's twisted one way, it can scare us. If it's twisted another, it makes us laugh. Sometimes the twist can make us do both. And I like that twist a lot. For those of you who know my writing, you'll know I followed up on these early inspirations. And these inspirations led me to have three, count them three, separate careers in science fiction. Most of my 20-some short stories have been horror, intentional or otherwise, and I am currently president of Horror Writers of America, an organization of some 500 members. At last, I got to write stories about cold lima beans, career number one. But I was also writing another kind of short story, humorous fantasy. Eventually, I put together a whole book of them. Then came a fateful disclave. Ginger Buchanan, the charming, talented, and extremely perceptive new editor at Ace Books, asked if I had anything to show her. I showed her A Malady of Magics. She bought it. They published it. A lot of you guys bought it. In publishing terms, this was very good. So a lot more of these books have come out, 10 more so far, with 2 others in the pipeline, career number 2. It was writing both humor and horror that got me my next job, the novelization of The Lost Boys, which required both. And it was the job I did in The Lost Boys that gave me the chance to do Batman, which you may recall did moderately well. 11 weeks on the bestseller list, 1.2 million copies in print. Today's show appearance with Deborah Norville, and yes, her lips are that big in person. So humor and horror have been very, very good to me. Humor and horror, 2 big twists, one leading to a laugh, the other to a scream. Sometimes, though, the twist can do both. I think it's time for a joke. All right, 2 cannibals are talking. The first one says, "I hate my wife." "All right," replies the second, "just eat the vegetables." Okay, let's think about this for a minute. Must we? Yes. On one level, this joke is about marital relations. A lot of jokes are about marital relations. Obviously, people have a lot of problems with marital relations. But this joke is also about people eating people, a definite no-no. Horror, in other words. This is what gives the humor its bite and makes a joke both funny and disgusting at the same time. For this joke makes us look at the phrase, I hate my wife in a whole new way. That's something that humor can do for you. It can take an authority figure, say George Bush, and make him look ridiculous, although George can do a pretty good job of that himself sometimes. Humor can sneak up on you too. You're just sitting there enjoying yourself, and suddenly you've learned something. Humor is subversive that way. It's what makes Huckleberry Finn one of the great American novels. It can make you look at something in a whole new way, and I think that's the purpose of all science fiction, not to mention the purpose of all literature, to stretch what you know and spark your imagination. Hey, I told you I was covering some serious stuff here. Still, humor gets no respect. This is a true story here. At big conventions, Terry Pratchett and I have been known to sit late into the night bemoaning this very fact. Nobody nominates us for awards. We're never reviewed by the big metropolitan dailies. At cons, we are forced to repeat the same humor and fantasy panel over and over and over again. At last count 17 times. That's an actual count. It is a dire fate, made more so by the consumption of vast quantities of beer. Of course, then one of us mentions how well our books sell, which frankly is pretty well, which calls for a celebration and more beer. People, after all, like to read humor. They just don't respect it. And why not? Humor is enjoyable. If you're enjoying something, it can't be good for you at the same time. This goes against every puritanical Calvinist thought that your parents and schools and church shoved into you as a child. But what happens when humor gets strange? When it comes out of nowhere with no explanation? You could be attending a guest of honor speech. Which leads us to our next question. So what the hell did happen in this room? Well, there were people chasing people across the stage, fist fights, telephone books, screams in the dark, gorillas, and the theme from Jeopardy. Maybe some of you even tried to make sense out of all of it. And no doubt some of you are waiting for me to decipher its true inner meaning. But let's face it, it was absolutely silly. Well, more than that, I suppose. Once or twice it got downright annoying. But I saw a certain number of open mouths in the audience when I was out there in my gorilla suit. And that's maybe not horror, but a certain degree of shock, I guess. And I heard a lot of laughs, so you did find some humor in it. And a lot of you stuck around to hear what I had to say after it was all over. Overall, though, I think you enjoyed yourselves. And you probably saw something here that you hadn't seen before. Maybe you even saw something that sparked your imagination. Uh-oh, there we are. Back at that word, imagination. Everything weird, everything wonderful, everything challenging. It now refers to books labeled not only science fiction, but fantasy, horror, magic realism, techno-thrillers, dark fantasy, and probably a dozen other names. But the best of these challenges, the best of these challenge and surprise, and take you to places that you've never been before. Sometimes these days, when I look at science fiction and fantasy books, I see the same old thing. Hardware books, elf books. The most wonder-filled of genres is sometimes threatened with becoming conservative. Say it isn't so. I urge those of you who write books to take people where they've never been before. And all of you who read them to take chances in the books that are different, that push the limits. Let's find something weird, something wonderful. Let's take the next step out. Then I think that is the strength of science fiction, the strength of humor, and the strength of all fiction. Thank you very much. See. Does anybody have any questions or anything? It was early here. After all that? The gorilla suit is hot, yes, and I got it from Boston Costume, which is just down the street. I don't know. I think for a weekend rental, I think it costs $60. I mean, it's not cheap, but hey, it's worth it in some situations. It creates a lasting impression. All right, well, thanks a lot.